back to the summit. I have a fabulous guest here. I always have a fabulous guest, but I'm really super excited about this one. I met her several years back, and as I just told her here prior to recording, like her story has brought me to tears numerous times. It's an amazing story, and it's something that all of you guys need to hear about because as we've talked about in different presentations, we need to start early with prevention to keep the health of our brain. So I have with me today Dr. Mary Newport, who she originally was a preemie doctor in neonatal ICU, and her life journey kind of transferred things over, but she is going to share all sorts of information for us on how we can be proactive with our brain and all sorts of good things that way. So Dr. Mary, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're so welcome, Dr. Lisa.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Oh, I'm so honored to have you here. So you are speaking all around the world on these topics too, which is so fabulous that I'm so honored just to have a half an hour of your time here today. So share with them a little bit of your story, how you even started looking into ketones and ketosis. I think that's the biggest thing because everybody resonates with the story.
Right. Yeah. So this happened back in 2008. And my husband, Steve, was only 51 when he started having symptoms that turned out to be Alzheimer's. He was officially diagnosed at 54. He was an accountant. And as you said, I worked in the newborn intensive care units for 30 years. We made a pact. He was going to stay home and work from home, which was awesome as an accountant. And he would take care of our children when I was working. So that worked out perfect. And it was, I just owe so much to him that he made it possible for me to be a doctor and a mother. It was just awesome. Great. And he said it was the best job he ever had, taking care of our kids. But when, he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease at age 54. And you can imagine how that changed our lives. We thought we were going to grow old together. Our grandparents lived to ripe old ages. And then you get this, and the average duration of life from diagnosis is about 7 years, and people with early onset often go much quicker than that. So it completely changed our outlook. It, looked much more grim. And of course, a diagnosis like Alzheimer's, you're told it's going to progress. There's really nothing that can stop it, no treatments that can stop it, much less improve it. And that's still true today. I mean, there are a couple of drugs that slow down the course of the disease, maybe for 6 months in some people, but that's the best you can hope for. And none of them, have claimed to improve, cognition or memory or turn it around. So it was dismal. And so now we, fast forward to age 58, so 4 years after his diagnosis, and he was declining very quickly. We were looking for clinical trials. At this point, he had stopped driving for 2 years. He couldn't read anymore. He couldn't do any simple math. He used a calculator, turn on a computer, which he had been on all day, every day. It was just amazing how quickly he was deteriorating at that point. And so there were 2 clinical trials that came along right around the same time, and there hadn't been any for a couple of years in our area. And so I signed him up to do clinical screenings 2 days in a row for these 2 different studies. And the night before the first screening, I got on the internet to look up the risks and the benefits of the 2 drugs. And I happened upon a press release about a medical food that was going to come out about a year later. At that time, it was called AC1202. Now it's called Axona. And it said that it improved the memory and cognition in nearly half of the people that took it. And that was after just 1 dose in their first study, 1 dose. 90 minutes later, they had improvements in their testing. And yes, and then they studied a group of 152 people for 6 months, some of them for 6 months, many for 90 days. And they also showed in that group that almost half had improvement in their testing, and that they maintained it, many of them, for 6 months. And so I became very curious, and it didn't say what it was or what it did, how it worked. So I was able to find their patent application, and it had a very lengthy explanation of diabetes of the brain, diabetes type 3 as Alzheimer's, which I had not ever heard about before. And what their food was MCT oil, medium chain triglyceride oil. And I was familiar with that because I'm a neonatologist. I took care of sick and premature newborns. And back in the early 80s, late 70s, we were adding MCT oil a little bit to each of the feedings of our tiniest preemies, and they would grow faster, get home faster.
That's huge.
So, yes. And one of the reasons they were doing that was they were trying to mimic the fatty acids that are in breast milk. There are MCTs in human breast milk. And the formula manufacturers started adding these directly to premature formulas. And then I learned in this patent application that MCT oil is extracted from coconut oil. And I learned that nearly every commercial infant formula in the world, I've been able to verify this as I go around the world, has coconut oil, and many of them also have MCT oil, and they're trying to mimic the fats in breast milk. It's really so intriguing. And so I thought, well, maybe this is a way I can help my husband. But I'm reading about this, and it's getting to be 1 a.m. and he's set up for a screening at 9 a.m. in the morning. So I didn't really have any chance to do anything about it at that point. But we ended up having a day before and a day after he started coconut oil with that first dose. And we went in the morning. He didn't do well. He needed a score of 16 out of 30 points on this mini mental status exam, and he got only 14 points. So he did not qualify. And we were so devastated because these two different drugs were our best hope, at that time. Maybe he would be one of the first people that would get this hopeful, great drug that might cure Alzheimer's. And so the doctor asked him to draw a clock, and he drew just a few little random circles and a few scattered numbers, like 4 numbers. And she said, wow, this is very disorganized. It looks like he's on the verge of severe Alzheimer's. And so on the way home, I thought, let's pick up some coconut oil.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know we could get
time period. It was kind of hard to find coconut. I mean, you could find it, but you had to search for it.
Yeah,
right?
we had to go over to Tampa, which was an hour in the opposite direction, to the only store I thought I had seen it in, health food store. It turned out it was more widely available even in our city than I knew, at the health food stores. And I had always wondered, why is coconut oil in a health food store? It has a bad reputation, but turns out that is flawed. That's really misinformation. But so when we got home, I looked on the internet, I relearned what medium chain triglycerides are, and I was able to find on the USDA website what the fatty acid composition of coconut oil is, and I learned that it was 60% medium chain triglycerides. And so it wasn't exactly the same one that's in that medical food, but they're all supposed to be ketogenic. So I figured that if he took a little over 2 tablespoons, 7 teaspoons of coconut oil, that would be equal to the dose that they were using in their studies of the medical food, as far as how much MCTs are in it. So the next morning, he was scheduled at 1 p.m. then to have his second screening. And it was a completely different town, different facility, different drug. And so around 9 a.m., I gave him a little over 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, and I put it in some oatmeal because it's kind of semi-solid at room temperature. You need to kind of melt it, or if you take it from a spoon, some people will gag,
Yeah.
But we put it in food. I took it too. I took the same amount. I got indigestion the first time I took it. But for Steve, we got down to Tampa this time, and they took him away. They did the tests, they brought him back, started taking his blood pressure, talking about drawing blood. And I'm like, what's going on? And she said, oh, he scored 18 out of 30 points. Whoa. And he only needed 16. So he qualified for the study. He had qualified, met all the other criteria. So he was accepted into their study. And I mean, I was so blown away. I thought, is it good luck? Right. Prayers, or was it really the coconut oil? And I thought, well, let's keep it going. We'll keep it going. And so I started reading everything I could about ketones, about coconut oil. I got a bazillion recipes. I found out that there was one cookbook I found that had, typical American foods, but, converted to using coconut oil. And so it was real simple to kind of make a switch there. And I thought, if one dose is helpful, and MCT oil, the ketones, you take one dose, the ketones go up, they come back down by about 3 hours. I thought, what does your brain do the other 21 hours of the day? I mean, you need fuel 24/7, your brain. So I started giving it to him throughout the day, started cooking with it the rest of the day. And eventually he ended up with doses of it, several times a day, eventually 4 times a day, but over about 4 months or so. And we started adding MCT oil too, when I found out that I could actually get it online. And even in one of the health food stores in my area had it. I'm in a little rural, semi-rural area north of Tampa, and I was shocked that I could actually get it, So, but we saw changes right away. He said many times it was like a light bulb went on the day he started coconut oil.
Wow.
And, by the next day, he was much more alert and talkative in the morning. The animation came back in his face. He started whistling, telling jokes. He had been like real sluggish and couldn't even figure out how to get water out of the dispenser from the refrigerator or get a spoon out of the drawer. He'd come back with the wrong utensil. I mean, all of that, he could suddenly do these things. And then he had some tremors like in his jaw when he talked. That went away, like right away.
Wow.
Yeah, he had a tremor in his hand when he was eating. And that, like, he would have a little bit of that in the morning, but after he had his coconut oil, 20 or 30 minutes, that would disappear. And he just, it was just so astounding. Better conversation. He was able to finish sentences. By about 2 months, he could tie his shoes again. He needed help tying his shoes. I mean, that's how bad off he was. And he could pick up his feet and run again. He'd been walking very stiffly, and he could pick up his feet and run and walk normally. And around 3 or 4 months, he said, "Hey, I can read again." And I said, "Well, why couldn't you read?" And he said, "The words were shaking around on the page. And now that has stopped." And he said, "I can read." And around 9 or 10 months, he could remember what he read several hours earlier. There was one incident where he had read a thing about Einstein in Scientific American. And a few hours later, he told me all about what the details that were in the article. I just couldn't believe it because he could barely finish a sentence when he was talking to me when we were doing gardening before we started the coconut oil. He couldn't remember if he was digging a hole or putting the dirt back in. He would keep going back and forth. I had to start digging the holes, and then he would put the plant in. I mean, and he was our gardener. He had done all of it, So, so many things improved, during that first year. And so I started trying to get the message out, really just a couple weeks after this happened. 2 weeks after he started taking coconut oil, he drew another clock. And this time it had the whole circle. All the numbers were there. It had a bazillion hands of the clock. So it was pretty messy, but it was so much more organized. And then
2 weeks.
Yes. And then a little over a month, it was even tidier. It was tidier, it looked neater. And I had started talking with a world expert, Dr. Richard Beach at the NIH, who's a world expert on ketones. And I talked to him before the second clock at 2 weeks, and I didn't really tell him what I was doing, but I just asked him, theoretically, do you think coconut oil could help somebody with Alzheimer's? And I already knew the answer. And he goes, "Oh, no, the levels would never be high enough." And I'm like, okay. But then when Steve drew that second clock, I faxed the clocks to him, and he called me back and he said, "This is unexpected." And he had been developing a ketone ester, which now is available from a couple companies, but he basically could get ketone levels up extremely high in 30 minutes. I mean, to the same levels that you would get during starvation after 7 to 10 days, in a matter of 30 minutes. And he believed that you would need much, much higher levels to bring about any improvement in Alzheimer's. But between Steve and the MCT oil, their studies, it showed that actually just mild nutritional ketosis, mild levels of ketones may be enough to help, to benefit some people, at least help improve some of their symptoms.
So then let's go a little bit about why that is, the science of of
Yeah.
why the ketones are affecting the brain, because we
Yeah.
were probably both taught in school that really your brain only runs off of sugar. And we
Yes.
know that's a little bit different now.
Yes. Yeah. We were taught that. And somewhere in the late 60s, there was a study around 1967, Dr. George Cahill and his associates, and they were studying starvation. And they fasted a lady who, she was a nurse. She was overweight. She wanted to lose weight. They brought her in the hospital and they fasted her for 41 days. She had water, vitamins, and salt. That's all she had for
You
41
lost
days.
weight.
And she lost a lot of weight. But what they learned from her by taking blood samples and all of this was that her ketone levels had risen very dramatically from almost zero to very, very high levels, similar to what Dr. Beach could get with his ketone ester.
Yeah.
And they were able to calculate that the ketones were providing at least 60% of the fuel to her brain.
Wow.
And your brain needs fuel. Every cell in your body needs fuel. So in most cases, well, if you're on a higher carb diet, your primary fuel is going to be glucose. If you're burning fat, you're starving, you're fasting, or doing some other a ketogenic diet, some other keto strategy, overnight fasting is an example, that type of thing, your ketone levels come up. And when you get into ketosis on a regular basis, you turn into a fat burner.
Absolutely.
And, if you're starving, if say you're fasting, after 24 or 36 hours, you have really used up the glucose that's stored in your body, stored in your liver and in your muscles. And if we didn't have fat, we would start breaking down muscle because some of those proteins can be converted to glucose, and we would die very quickly within a week to 10 days, probably, if we had water, sooner if we don't. But because we have fat, in that situation, when you've used up all the glucose in your stores, you break down fat, it releases fatty acids, and most of those those can be used by most of the organs, the heart, muscles, other organs, as fuel, but they don't cross easily into the brain. So the brain needs something else. It's a very active organ. It uses about 20 or 25% of the calories we eat every day. It's very, very energy greedy. And so the liver converts part of those fatty acids to ketones, and ketones are very tiny particles, or even smaller particles than glucose. They easily cross the blood-brain barrier. They're taken up. They go into the same chemical pathway that glucose does to make the energy molecule ATP, which is what really allows our cells to carry out their functions. And, I think of ATP as when you flex your muscle, you flex your biceps. Every muscle fiber needs ATP to do that, and that it needs more ATP to actually relax again. So we're constantly making ATP. I mean, tons of it every day.
Yes.
And a lot of it every day. So you need that fuel, but in this case, ketones can provide that. And, it's really interesting. It's been known for a long time that the brain can use ketones or glucose, but Dr. Stephen Cunnane was actually able to prove that in Alzheimer's disease, that he uses ketone, glucose, and PET scans to do this. In Alzheimer's, the areas of the brain that don't take up glucose normally do take up ketones normally.
Oh, wow.
Which is very profound. It's a profound finding. It was believed that that was the case, but he was actually able to prove it. A couple of others by different methods have proven it too. And the problem in Alzheimer's is that there are areas of the brain that don't take up glucose normally. It's like diabetes of the brain. So there was a group at Brown University, Dr. Suzanne Delamonte and her group, and they looked at the brains of people that had died with Alzheimer's that did not have type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And they found that there was insulin resistance and insulin deficiency in the brain, in these specific areas of the brain. And then with each stage of Alzheimer's, it progressed through the brain until at the late stages, most of the brain was involved, with this process, where there's poor glucose uptake in the brain. And you can see this very clearly on PET scans, glucose PET scans, and they've known this since the 1980s. But it was kind of one of those things that was put on the back burner. It wasn't really the emphasis, the thing that was emphasized for research and developing medications, to target that particular problem. They were targeting plaques in the brain, trying to remove plaques in the brain for so many years, and really still are. So she coined the term diabetes type 3 to indicate Alzheimer's disease. And so there has been a lot more interest and a lot more work on that since then. But a number of studies now with MCT oil that have confirmed what those original studies found. And now some ketogenic diets with and without MCT oil have pilot studies have gotten done. Now they're in the midst of larger studies of this. They had good responses in the pilot studies. And this, for Parkinson's as well. There is another study that just came out with a ketogenic diet that included some coconut oil. And that one showed like a 42% improvement in symptoms in people with Parkinson's. So there are several different dementias, other types of neurodegenerative diseases that have this in common with Alzheimer's, that there are areas of the brain that don't take up glucose normally. And this happens also in bipolar disease, schizophrenia, autism. Children with Down syndrome have decreased glucose uptake in their brains. So there are so many people that could potentially benefit just for the brain,
Absolutely.
Not to mention the rest of the body, for.
And what I have seen over the course of just, I've been in practice almost 20 years now, probably the last 10 years more so, that people walk in and they are scared of this in their future because of somebody in their family line that had it, right?
Yes, common.
So it's one of those things that they're trying to be proactive, right? And I think that was one of the conversations I had with another one of our speakers and one of our mutual friends, Dr. Heather Carden. And that's what she brought up. She said, Dr. Newport's saying that you need to be prevention, like start your prevention in as early as your 30s.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about lifestyle, because so many of our diseases now are lifestyle related.
Related, they are. And, what she's talking about is, well, with Alzheimer's, they know that people, because they've done very long-term studies now with these glucose PET scans, that people will have a decrease in glucose uptake in their brain 10, 20 years, or maybe even more before they even have the first symptoms of Alzheimer's, or they already have that process starting in their brain related to insulin resistance. And they've even studied people in their 20s who have a family history of it. And even in their 20s, some people have decreased glucose uptake in their brain. So, that's really pretty frightening. And, when you get into your 30s, your late 30s, your brain starts declining. I guess people used to mostly live into their 40s and occasionally.
Right. So by that point it was fine, but hey.
Your brain starts shrinking. And, when you're somewhere between 50 and 60, a lot of other things start deteriorating a little bit each year. And for some people, it happens more rapidly than others. And I mean, genetics probably factors into that, but lifestyle can majorly factor into that. And one of the important things, like the Alzheimer's Association, the last few years, I go to their conference every summer. They talk about lifestyle changes in lifestyle could account for 30% of dementias, people that develop dementia, and that these are what they call modifiable risk factors, things that you can change. So poor diet is on the top of the list. And diabetes kind of falls into that category. People with diabetes have a 30% risk of developing dementia. It's like 6 times higher than the average population.
That's not well known.
No, it's not well known.
That is not well known at all. People are worried about diabetes because they're worried about losing, eyesight or losing a limb, or you know what I mean? But if all of a sudden you're going to lose your mind too.
Yes. And so as you age, your chances of having diabetes increase, your chances of having pre-diabetes increase. If you have pre-diabetes, it's an average of about 5 years until you progress to diabetes. And it's very, very hard. It's almost like a disease like Alzheimer's, where it's really hard to stop it unless you make a really drastic change in your lifestyle. And there are a number of studies out right now Sarah Hallberg, Dr. Hallberg, Dr. Jeff Bolick and his whole group, Dr. Eric Westman, they have used low carb, higher fat diet, and they have completely reversed, gotten people completely back to normal numbers for insulin resistance and fasting blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, after 8 to 10 weeks on a low carb, high fat diet, basically a ketogenic diet. And it's amazing. And, there are several case reports out now from Kelly Gibbous and her group. And they also were looking at cognitive effects and combining it with a ketogenic diet. And some little bit older people, they were like 65, 71, kind of in that age group, but they already had memory impairment, Alzheimer's disease. Two of them had mild Alzheimer's disease. Another one, I believe she had mild cognitive impairment. But in addition to reversing the hemoglobin A1C, the fasting blood sugar, the insulin levels, all of that returning to normal, their scores on that mini mental status exam, that 30-point exam, increased in one case from 23 to 29 out of 30. And the other one, 21 to 28 out of 30. That's a humongous increase. And this was in 10 weeks.
And that's diet related. Like that is diet related.
That is diet. And they encourage them to exercise, it was kind of mild, it wasn't super vigorous exercise, but they encouraged them to do that.
But we also both know that exercise increases ketone uptake.
It does. It does. It does.
So even just going out and walking, folks, if it's just, I see there's always that thing, that block for people that they don't want to exercise because they feel like it's weight. No, just go out and start walking around the block.
Yes. Yeah, it does. A 30 to 40-minute walk will increase your ketones, and it will help, keep them up for 8 or 9 hours. It's really impressive. And Dr. Cunane, who I mentioned earlier, with this ketone PET scans, he studied people with Alzheimer's, and they had them come in, they had mild Alzheimer's, and they came in 3 days a week. They walked for 40 minutes on a treadmill, kind of at a medium speed. And he was able to show that it tripled the ketone uptake in the brain with the PET scans. That is huge.
Yeah.
There's
huge. So much that we can do for prevention. So much.
Yeah.
And what are some other things?
Yeah. So the diet too, I wanted to mention, and Kelly Gibbos's, they were aiming for ketosis. They were aiming for levels of at least 0.5 millimoles, which is not very high. It's not very high. And these people had that much improvement. And, so basically they were, with the ketogenic diet, you can figure, you basically eat more fat and much less carbohydrate. And they personalized the diet for these people to try to get their ketone levels, which they did. They succeeded at getting their ketone levels around like 1 millimole. And, they had that profound of an improvement over, just 10 weeks on that type of a diet. So it doesn't have to be a super drastic, absolutely no carb, 90% fat diet. It needs to be, it can be a much more moderate, much more reasonable diet where you do have just a little bit of carbs, maybe, instead of a cup of white rice, you'll go for a quarter cup of whole grain rice and get the best nutrients out of that kind of diet. And then, the other types of diets, they're that are aimed, like the DASH diet to control high blood pressure, Mediterranean diet. Those have been studied by different researchers and, with the Alzheimer's Association. And those people, it seems to help slow it down and, lower the risk of developing dementia and that type of thing. So I think in the best of all worlds, you maybe combine something like that. Look at the Mediterranean diets and eat whole grains, whole foods, mostly vegetables, maybe a little bit of fruits like berries, that kind of thing, more healthy fats, and, basically combine that with lower carb, higher fat overall. And it could be very, very beneficial and help if you have diabetes. These people who had diabetes in the longer term studies got completely off their insulin and even their oral medications, for diabetes in many cases. And, they basically went into remission.
Right. And that's the whole thing. I feel as if, I'm a chiropractor, so I always am that person that states that the body has that innate healing. It knows how to heal itself if given the right situation.
Mm.
And unfortunately, I feel like so many people get on a medication and they feel like this is it for the rest of their life. But you had just said, like, people can get off of insulin. It's one of, I had talked with one of our speakers about it. So many people will say, well, I caught diabetes. And well, we didn't catch diabetes. It's not something we get. It's something that we eat our way into. And so again, by making simple changes, and even like you had said, incorporating MCT oil into the diet, incorporating coconut oil, sometimes, people will take it and take spoonfuls of it, right? However, you can start cooking with it, right?
Cook with it. You can put it on anything warm, coconut oil. You can cook with it at like low to low medium heat. Eggs are perfect in it. They suck up the oil.
Yep.
Omelets, that kind of thing. I saute vegetables in it. I put it into soups and chilies that I make. I just put in however many I usually put like 1 tablespoon per serving of things like that I make.
Yeah.
And, it's just a fun and easy way, to get it, is just to make it part of your kind of everyday habits, cooking, with cooking. And,
should we give a disclaimer though on the MCT? Like, probably don't suck down a tablespoon right off the get-go.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And I just feel as if somebody's going to do that. And I'm like, we need to tell you why.
Yeah. We got lucky. My husband got extremely lucky taking more than 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. And I had indigestion. I got used to it. I kind of backed off and started with a little bit and worked up. And as other people started doing this, I'm hearing about diarrhea, being a big problem. And so, I tell people for MCT oil, start with a ½ teaspoon 2 or 3 times a day with food. Coconut oil, 1 teaspoon 2 or 3 times a day with food. And just every few days, increase it a little bit, and then try to work up to a few tablespoons a day. Like if you're trying to prevent it, 3 to 4 to 5 tablespoons a day, something like that, of coconut and or MCT oil. And, what I ended up doing with my husband, he was taking both. And he improved so much with coconut oil. I didn't want to stop doing that and just do MCT oil. Plus the levels with MCT peak at 90 minutes. They come down at 3 hours. And with coconut oil, it's like a lower peak, but a much longer duration. So I thought, if we mix these together and give it to him 3 or 4 times a day, we can probably keep those ketone levels going to his brain 24/7. Yeah. And so, and then more recently, there was a study that came out from a group in Japan that I've gotten to know really well. I've taken a big interest in this. And they found that the lauric acid in coconut oil, which is half of the fat in coconut oil, stimulates production of ketones directly in astrocytes. This is in cultures in the lab, but directly in astrocytes, which are brain cells that nourish other brain cells. So yeah, so this could explain why, even with lowish levels of ketones from coconut oil, why my husband would improve so much.
That's amazing.
That was amazing.
That's amazing. Great. So let's share with them. I know you've got a book. I can see it right behind there on your shoulder too. Yes. But and you guys, this is a great interview. Thank you so much for all this information.
Oh, you're welcome.
So the complete book of ketones, you can find it on Amazon?
Amazon, yeah. Barnes & Noble, Indie Books, a bunch of different Books A Million. Okay. They all carry it. Amazon probably has the best price, though. Okay. It's very, very reasonable.
Yes. And then coconutketones.com is your website, correct?
Yeah, Coconut Ketones, CONUTKETONES. A lot of people try to put a Y in there. There's no Y.
Oh, right. They do that a lot. Ketone. Yes. Yeah, no, ketones is KET1. That's so funny.
My phone always autocorrects ketones to KEYTO.
Or keystone, right?
Yeah, right, keystone.
All right. Well, Dr. Mary.
A pretty picture book. This is a book that talks about ketones and evolution and history, the history of the ketogenic diet. I interviewed 16 researchers and keto dietitians, who have been practicing this for a very long time. I just wanted people to know that this is serious yes. science behind all of this, and then the nuts and bolts of how to put together a ketogenic diet. So a lot of questions and answers about coconut, MCT oil, ketone supplements like ketone esters, ketone salts, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Dr. Mary, thank you so much. I
you're
so
welcome.
appreciate all your information.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa.
Thank you.